and go on.
From Dragon Ball Z, and you're listening to the Monsters with Attitude podcast. Like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, embrace the attitude! Yeah!
Hi, this is Alan Henry. I play King Kong and Scar King in the Monsterverse, and you're listening to the Monsters with Attitude podcast. So, like, comment, and subscribe, and remember, embrace the attitude, yeah!
Hearing Stephanie and Alan always makes me chuckle, man. Embrace the attitude. What's going on, listeners with attitude? It is I, your host, Joe, once again, and joined with me, as always, my brother from another mother, the bearded one himself, Mr. Eric Stolp. It's like stop with an L. What's going on, buddy?
I'm doing good. I'm excited for this. Oh man, blast down memory lane, because I mean we've been talking about this since we landed the interview and stuff like that, and just right here, I mean this guy's responsible for these gems in our childhood. So yeah, I'm very excited to talk to him tonight.
Likewise, man. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that I was a fan of this in grade school and high school because it dates us as well as our guest, but. It's definitely a huge part of my younger years, we'll say. And I was super excited. And honestly, there's a lot we want to get to. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the master of the mystical arts himself, Mr. Simon Strange.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Hello. You know, I'm actually just weeks or months away from completing my PhD, and I will be Dr. Strange.
It is amazing.
That is legit now.
Yes.
Yeah, that's definitely like 40% of the reason I've been doing it.
Absolutely.
To be Dr. Strange. So,
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If your last name is Strange or Doom or something, you have to go get a PhD. Yeah. It's like a law for sure. Yeah. Well, Simon, thank you so much for making time. I know you're a busy man, so I kind of want to get right into it because we do have a lot to cover. So I want to start like we always do. What's your earliest Godzilla or Tokusatsu memory? How'd you become a fan? Did you grow up with it? Tell us a little background.
So there was a show that I watched when I was very young, 4 years old. I don't know. Maybe I only saw it a few times, but like it was seared in my memory. And it wasn't until I was at G-Fest in like 2012 that I was able to figure out what the heck this show was. But it was a show where there was a little boy and he had a magic whistle. And there was a family of robots who lived inside a volcano. And he would get in trouble and blow the whistle, and the robots would turn into spaceships, like rocket things, and fly out of the top of the volcano and come and save him. And I was just like, and I would talk about this. Some people were like, "That sounds like a thing you made up," but it's called the space. It's called the Space Giants, and it was like 1968 or something. And it was a Japanese show, and somehow I saw the show when I was young, and I was just like, "That, what was that? That was so rad!" Like it's like, and he summons with the, and people was like, "That sounds super wild." But yeah. That's definitely my earliest sort of like, Sentai, like sort of like, I don't know, but it's definitely within that whole thing. And they were giant robots. They fought monsters. It had a bit of an Ultraman vibe to it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was live action. It wasn't anime.
That's live action. That
really?
Is,
okay. I can't say I've heard of it.
You can Google it, and yes, nobody's ever heard of it, but I saw it, and it was burned into my brain as a little kid. I'm just like, what was that? It was so cool.
I'm writing it down right now to
and there was and there was a wizard, like an old crazy Japanese hermit guy who was kind of a wizard. I think he was the villain. I don't know. He was around. I had no idea what was happening. It was fascinating stuff.
That's amazing.
And why did I watch this show alone? I was like 4. Like
I got to say, I think that's got to be one of the best ones, because I mean, not that it's wrong that everybody else always says either Godzilla, Ultraman, or Power Rangers, because those are all fantastic franchises, but a deep dive like that's rare.
Yeah, you can't make that up. That's just a weird, right? That's a thing. Yeah,
right.
And it's so funny that you described it like that, because like I think all of us kind of got into the genre with seeing these weird out of this world characters or designs or whatever, and it just sucked us in. We're like, what are we watching? But I can't stop. It's crazy.
No, it's gotta, you know, especially when you're young, like you're trying to make sense of things. You're like, oh, okay, I've seen a car. This is a bigger car. Oh, I've seen a horse. This is a horse with a human body. Or you know, like you're trying to make sense. And like, man, I watch these shows. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Like I can't connect it to anything, which means I've got to make all these new connections in my brain, which makes it, you know, that's what memories are, right? Like if you do the same thing every day, you don't remember, right? It's you got to shake it up.
That's funny. What was your first like Godzilla film that you ever got into?
I was just gonna ask that.
That's an interesting question. So I don't remember watching much Godzilla. So I definitely saw Godzilla 1985. I definitely saw that. I was definitely scared of stuff though. Like if it, you know, even through or like early high school, if something was scary, I'd be like, I don't know if I want to watch that. It might be scary. Like really, like scary. That's not what I want to do. Like especially in the 80s, there was a lot of like gore was very big and like blood. I had nothing to do with that. So here's how I remember is that I remember when I was interviewing at Pipeworks. We're jumping ahead, but when I was interviewing at Pipeworks and they were like, "Oh, we're working on this Godzilla game," I'm like, "Okay, like Rodan, right?" And like I don't know why, but like I was like Rodan. I remember that. I was like, "Have I seen Rodan?" I'm like, I don't know, but like that was the first thing you talk about Godzilla. I'm like, "Sure, Godzilla." Rodan. That was the first thing out of my head. And my favorite dinosaur was always the Ankylosaurus. And so I must have not been familiar with Anguirus, right? Because if I had seen Anguirus, I would have been like, "Oh man, that's like an you know." So I think I must not have seen anything with Anguirus in it. But I definitely have seen Godzilla versus Mothra, and like I said, I definitely saw Godzilla in 1985. I definitely saw, gosh, what's the one with Minya? Return of Godzilla or Son of Godzilla? Oh, the one with the giant mantis, right?
Yeah,
Son of Godzilla.
So now I've seen, when I see the giant mantis, the name is like with a K, like Kurachacha or something like that, right?
Kamacuras.
So I remember. So when I watched that movie, there's a part because they go to an island and there's a nuclear winter, and somebody's just like, and you know, so these people, and it's dubbed, right? It's the 80s, and they're like, he's like, "Oh, look out! There's those giant mantis over there," and they're like, "The what?" And he goes, "Giant mantis. It's a new word I made up. It's a combination of giant and mantis." And I was like, that's dumb. What? What are they? Yeah. So I was like, oh, I bet in Japanese that's less dumb, right? In Japanese, it's actually a different word rather than giant. I was like, well, you didn't really make a word. You kind of put the okay, yeah. So I definitely watched that movie as you know, probably a 10-year-old. That's what I remember from that movie. I was like, the translation did not make sense. Like I don't remember Godzilla. I remember Minya doing the little smoke rings, and but also I remember the bad translation. That was stuck with me. Anyway, so some Godzilla, but Godzilla himself was not a big focus.
Gotcha.
I always really loved the underdogs, like the weird, like can't quite get it together. Man, like I love Baragon, like GMK Baragon. I love that stuff, right? He's like, "Oh, come on, puppy! No, you can do this. Oh no!" That's definitely where I like to see things. Yeah, or like the larval form of Mothra, super cool. I was real big when we jumping ahead again, but when we were putting Mothra in the video game, I was like, Mothra has to have two forms, right? You want to fight as the larval form, and it's going to be an awesome thing if you can just win as the larva. Like I don't even have to transform. No, I'll just beat you as the larva. It's like, oh, the shame, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I beat you as the larva. Oh, you're just embarrassed, right? So I was like, but that should be very possible. And like we'll get into that probably later. But like I made it so that that's very possible in certain matchups, right? There's certain matchups where you really want to stay larva the whole time because actually, like adult form is pretty weak in certain matchups. You want to stay larva. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's so funny. So you've been talking a little bit about Pipeworks River. How did you come to work with Pipeworks and stuff like that? How did you get your position with the company?
So I grew up in the 80s. I had a team of friends, and now there's this show Stranger Things. That's exactly me. That is 100% me. That is I'm exactly that age. I am I rode around BMX bikes and did sleepovers playing D&D in the basement. Like that was 100%. I've heard some people be like, that show is like those kids are so unsupervised. I'm like, no, man, that is 100% my life. So
yes, it was.
One of my good friends from that group was Solomon, and Solomon we lost touch in high school. He went off to tour with this punk band, and I went off to sort of do other things. And this is pre-internet days, right? But then we both ended up getting into video game development, right? And my mom ran into him, and I was off in New York making video games, and my mom ran into him, and she was like, "Oh, I saw Solomon, and I got his email." I'm like, "Oh, Solomon, I haven't seen him in years," and I got in touch with him, and he was like, "Oh, I'm making video games now." I'm like, "Well, I'm also making video games now." We'd both gotten into that career path, and then he was a founder of Pipeworks, and so because he was working at Dynamics, which was sort of the Sierra Online. Anyway, it was a big development studio here in Oregon. So he was working at Dynamics, and then some people from Dynamics decided to leave and start their own company, which was Pipeworks. And then they needed somebody to work with them. Someone's like, I've got a good friend from back in the day who was also a video game designer, and like he could come. And Solomon was building this tool that was going to make all the monsters and put together the animations. And it was going to be the engine that you're going to use to build all the fighting system. And so. Yeah, so they hired me to use Solomon's tool, and we were very good friends, and so we worked really well together, and that was kind of awesome.
So were you? This is sorry to interject, Eric. So were you there at like the almost like very beginning of Pipeworks then, or like a year or two?
It was like just about 1 year. So Pipeworks was founded at the very end of 1999, and they did. Well, one of the first things was they did some demos for the Xbox. So the first Xbox had not come out yet, and they made the early demos. So there's a demo with a bunch of ping pong balls on mouse traps, and there was a demo with a robot that would dance, and then this woman with an X tattoo over an able to jump out. So that was Pipeworks built those demos. Like this is what the Xbox is going to be able to do, right?
Gotcha.
And then they got one early project, and so they staffed up, and then like that project dissolved, and they had to staff back down. But then they got this Godzilla project, and they're like, should we staff back up again? I don't know. Should we do this? And so I was like their first hire on that second cycle. So they've been around a year, and they kind of went up and went down. It was like, is the studio going to fall apart, or is this contract going to carry us through? And so I came on, and that game was extremely successful. And so Pipeworks is still going strong now. I was working there this afternoon. So
that's actually a perfect segue. Can you to my next question? Can you tell us a little bit about how the rights for Godzilla came to be with Pipeworks? Sorry, I'm tripping over my words.
So it is all about Kirby Fong. He was a producer at Atari, and he was a huge Godzilla fan, and he had a vision. He was like, we should make a sweet Godzilla game in the vein of Power Stone. So Power Stone was a game that had been out on the Dreamcast, and it was a cool like 4-player brawler, madcap 3D moving around in an environment. He was like, I want to be a monster fighting through a city with 4 players. He had this vision, and he was and he's the one he picked Pipeworks, and he worked with people there to get some early prototypes, and he was like got the money through. It was all him. Like, thank you so much, Kirby, for like having this vision. Let me jump ahead to one fun anecdote.
Yeah. So
we're working on this game, right? And so Solomon and I were working on it, and Solomon and I were like, okay, how do the controls work, right? Because we played, Street Fighter, we played Soul Calibur, we played Smash Brothers, we played all this stuff, and we're like, well, is it button combos or is it directions? And I was like, okay, well, if it's gonna be like a camera's swinging all around 3D environment, then you can't really use screen space as your direction. So you can't really do up, down, left, right.
Mhm.
And Solomon said, no way are we doing that. This is going to be a 2-monster game, monster on the left, because that's what a fighting game is. It's just 2 monsters. And this whole idea of 4 monsters running around, we're not going to do that. We'll try it. It's not going to work. 2 monsters, left and right. That's what we're building. So I was like, okay. And so we did all of our controls based on left, right, up, down, right?
Yep.
Very, very much like Smash Bros. Was doing, although Smash Bros. Was not nearly so big at the time. And we're like, okay, we're doing this left, right thing. And we built the whole game out. We got something that was really very, very good. And then we got to the milestone. So there's, every month or so there's a milestone. We have to deliver a certain feature, a certain thing. We got to the milestone. We're like, oh, you have to put in the 4-player build. And we're like, 4-player build. What a waste of time. And we're like, okay, well, I guess then we'll have to like put 2 more HUDs at the bottom. And then we'll like have to have a camera that transitions and do it. Okay, we'll do a thing, whatever. And like we put it in, and it was so good immediately. And we're like, oh, that's totally good. We're doing that. Like it was funny because the whole studio, we were all convinced without having tried it. We were like, that's dumb. No, it's just a 1-on-1 fighter. And we put it in the 4-player, and it was perfect right away. We were like, oh, that's pretty good. That's immediately a lot of fun. Okay.
That was
once again, thank you, Kirby Fong. That was his vision, and he was totally right.
So Kirby is the one he approached Toho, or did Toho approach you guys?
Toho definitely. I mean, he definitely went to Toho and was like, "Please let me make Godzilla." So fun getting into the weeds about international copyright law. So in Japan, you can't give away your rights to a thing, right? So if, like in America, if I draw something or something, I make some character, you could buy that character from me, and I could sign a document, and then it would be your character. And even though I created it, you now own it and can do other things and can license it or sell it to somebody else or whatever.
Yeah.
In Japan, you can't, right? If I say you're allowed to use a thing, you are only allowed to use it as long as I continue to agree, and I cannot transfer that power. And so this means licensing anything Japanese is a huge pain in the ass, right? Because no matter how much you pay them, no matter how much you set it up the contracts, at any time they could be like, I don't think you're being respectful. I revoke your license. Right?
Wow.
Yes. And so this is why, indirectly, Godzilla stuff is often bad. Because big, high-money companies do not want to potentially waste their money on that thing. So you get a lot of smaller things about a thing, where they're like, well, okay, we'll try to do this Godzilla thing. It's really hard. Although I will say, like, working with Toho is very relationship based, right? And so like they were really on us on that first Godzilla game. And they're like, okay, no, you get it. And they backed off a lot. I have more fun anecdotes. I've told these several times, but they're good. So in original Street Fighter, I love Blanca.
Yes.
Right? And he would roll into the ball. So
yes.
I don't know if Blanca kind of fell off in this, but I thought Blanca was great. And I was like, oh man, and Gears has got to roll into a ball. That's super cool.
Yes.
And Toho was like, absolutely not. That's ridiculous. He's never done anything like that in any films. And I was like, but it's so good. Well, and so I said, okay, well, what about for his rage attack? Because with your rage attack, you exceed your normal limits. And so they're like, okay, they allowed his rage attack. He rolls into a ball, right? And we're like, yes, okay, cool. And then Final Wars came out. So the first game came out, and then Final Wars came out, and I watched Final Wars, and I'm just like, oh man, they definitely played the game, right? Because man, Gears does nothing but roll around in a ball in that movie, right? And Toho was like, he cannot do that. That's not allowed. And then I put it in the game, and they allowed it, and then people making finals are like, that's rad. You should do that all the time. Matt Frank then put it in a comic book, one of the Godzilla. The IDWs, like Anguirus rolled a ball. Like, yeah, man, I rolled into a ball. Also in Final Wars, Gigan had his shotgun blast, which is a thing that I just made up, right? Because we had like you can charge up your weapon or you can do a burst from your weapon. I was like, what kind of burst? In fact, I believe the Gigan actually has no beam at all in the movie. But I believe that, like, in one poster, he has an I-beam in a poster.
Yes.
And so we're like, oh, yeah, so I'll do that. But the shotgun blast, I just made that up, right? I was like, cool, pow, 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 whatever. And then it was in Godzilla Final Wars. I'm like, okay, like that's my legacy. I'm just like,
I was just saying, you
I
literally
understand that,
inspired
right?
them
Yeah.
to put that in the movie. Honestly,
In the second, the more recent Godzilla franchise, where King Ghidorah fights, right?
Mhm.
There's a bunch of scenes where King Ghidorah and Rodan are fighting. I'm like, that's completely one of our animations from our game, right? There's a bunch of aerial fighting stuff. And I'm like, oh, they definitely played our games. Like, and of course they did, right? And like, if you're trying to imagine, like you're an animator trying to imagine how Ghidorah's fight, you're gonna play the game where Ghidorah fights and like see him do certain moves and be like, oh, that's cool, and it goes in the movie. But like, yeah, I love it when I see that stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, we did that. That was all right. Okay, cool.
Real quick, Eric, I know you have a question coming up, but so Simon, are you saying that essentially you could have a year contract with
Yeah.
Toho,
Yeah.
and on day 362, they
Yep.
can say nope?
Yes.
Like, wow.
Yeah.
I don't mean to go back to that, but that just
No.
blew my mind when you said that.
It's even worse than that because many of the individual creators on those Godzilla movies individually own the rights to their characters. Toho, as a company, only owns some of the characters. Like, if you want Jet Jaguar, I know, you have to go to the guy, right, and be like, please, we want to use Jet Jaguar. He's like, I don't know, I don't think so, maybe not. And you're like, please, and like they just don't want to deal with that, right? So it's like you could make a game and Toho could be totally on board, and like that one guy be like, no, I changed my mind. Like it is tricky, right? So people talk about the rights, the trickiness, and how much money, and like the fans, they often imagine that it's about money or about being respectful. And I was like, oh man, it's kind of about just like risk, right? Like, is it worthwhile to spend a lot of money when this much risk exists? Like that's tricky. So
that is a huge risk for a company to take. I mean, even a multi-billion-dollar company
Sure.
to have something canceled from them, and you've spent tens of millions of dollars on something. That's
yeah. Oh no, it's a big problem.
Yeah. Wow.
That's crazy.
I've never known. I didn't know that. I mean, fascinating to know.
This is. I am not a lawyer. This is how it was explained to me in the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
Like as we were negotiating, and then we're talking with Kirby, and we're trying to get. So for the first game, the roster was basically set when I came on at Pipeworks, right? They'd already like it's going to be 11 monsters. I think they'd already picked the cities, and like they had barely built the game, but they had those contractual parameters pretty much in place. But I was heavily involved in trying to pick out the roster for the other two games.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of like, can we get this one? They're like, we really don't want it. I was like, no, we need this one. I was like, well, how about this? I mean, going back and forth, like there was a lot of negotiation there. So,
wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So you were just kind of talking about how you felt realizing on Final Wars that they had to have played the game to kind of put that in there and stuff like that. What was your initial feeling when you found out that you yourself were a Godzilla fan or Tokusatsu fan or Kaiju fan in general, that you were going to be brought on board to make a Godzilla game? Like, what was your initial thoughts?
I'd say I would not have called myself a Godzilla fan going into it.
Really?
Like, I knew stuff. I was aware of stuff, but like I'm enthusiastic about a lot of things, right? So actually I went, and so the early days I went and I watched, every Godzilla movie I could get my hands on, which was almost all of them. And it's really interesting. I've talked about this a lot because I watch them from a professional point of view. I'm watching them being like, oh, how am I going to do that monster? Ooh, how do I character? Like that was a whole bunch of the movies, especially the more recently, Biollante, Space Godzilla, like all, I hadn't seen any of that, right? So I was watching that all, for the first time, or even like Godzilla versus or against Mechagodzilla, right? The 2003 film. So we got an early screening of that because we were like, oh, we're going to put Kiru in as we're going to replace Mechagodzilla 2 with Kiru in the Japanese version of Destroy All Monsters Melee. And we were like, oh, okay. So like, I mean, that movie hadn't even come out in the US where like we got it, so we do these things. Anyway, but I watched all these movies with a very like sort of adult, I need to know this stuff. I have to, pay attention. I have to know who the C2 are. I have to know who the different alien groups are. I have to know like the different politics of the groups. And like I'll say, pretty much one of my very favorite of the Godzilla movies is Space Godzilla. I was just like, oh, that one's really good. And people are like, no, Simon, that's not one of the good ones. people don't like that one.
No,
like,
it is. I love Space Godzilla. You're right.
I like it because Godzilla fights Mogira, and then Mogira fights Space Godzilla, and then Godzilla fights Space Godzilla, and then Godzilla and Mogira team up to beat Space Godzilla. And I was like, that's a story. Like that's like there's movies where it's like, oh no, what's going to happen when they eventually fight? And then they fight once. And I'm like, well, it's hard to have much of an arc then, right? You kind of feel like you're waiting. Like I want the things, or like Godzilla versus Megalon is another good one, right? Because you have like the team ups and the crossovers. Like, oh, but now he's losing. Oh, now Gigan comes in, and now but Jaguar comes in, and now like that's what I like, right? I want to see those different combinations. I want to see them fight. I want to see different styles when they're fighting different people. That's the only movie with Megalon, but there's a section where it's not clear what's going on, but like they're fighting, the Megalon like disappears and there's this sound, right? And I'm just like, I think he's tunneling underground very fast. And I'm like, man, they don't show that on screen, but I'm like, no, that's what I'm imagining in my head. Like, he's tunneling underground. I was like, maybe he was flying because he also flies in the movies. Like he could have been flying in between. I was like, no, tunneling underground. That's cool. That's going to be his thing. And he's from underground. I was like, I don't know if that quite makes sense, but okay. So I'm watching these movies and like that's what I'm thinking of, right? I'm trying to imagine what's happening there. And Gigan teleporting. I love Dulcine. I was a Dulcine main on Street Fighter. I told you, like, the weirder the better, right? And so I'm like, someone's got to have a teleport, right? And so Gigan was my teleporting guy. So
I love it.
Yeah,
so
so cool.
You're talking about the rosters a little bit, and you said that in the first game, you guys knew for sure it was going to be 11. Did you know exactly those 11, or did you guys get to pick anything?
Nope.
Okay.
It was that these 11 and that Orga is a secret unlockable that you can't see initially. That was all set. So I'm not sure who had decided that, but that was definitely set and in the contract before I came on at Pipeworks.
Okay. Now, was there somebody in any of the three that you would have liked to have gotten that they said no, or was it always this is it, like this is what you get to use? No, there was a lot of negotiation for 2 and 3. So Godzilla Unleashed, we got every single monster I wanted. We sat down with the lead animator Armando. We sat down, and because it was not clear how many we could make, we were like, it'll be at least. Actually, we got really dinged for this in the press, but we were like, yikes, we have to rebuild everything. And so it's like, higher resolution models, all new skeletons, and all new animations. And we're like, our combat system, it's like 250 animations per character, right? And we're like, okay, if it's 10 characters, that's 2,500 animations. We have 3 animators. That's like 4 animations a day, every day I was like, that is, and then some of these animations can take 2 days, right? And sometimes you don't work on the weekend. Like it can be rough. So it was not clear. So with Godzilla Unleashed, we were like, well, at least 11 characters. And then the top would be 26, right? And so it was like, that's our range. Yeah. And we sort of put it out. We're like, okay, well, if we do 11, it would be these 11. And if we did all 26, it's these. And here's some swaps. And like, I remember having some conversations where they're like, well, what if we got this one? I was like, well, if we cut Mothra, I can give you 3 others. Because Mothra is very complicated, right? And they're like, you can't cut Mothra. I'm like, well, Mothra requires the work of 3 other monsters because it's, there's 2 different forms, and we need this whole flying mechanic because in the first 2 games, nobody flies. Like, Mothra appears to fly, but it's actually just a set height above the ground, right? And like when you jump, it's just an animation that brings you up and down, but like at all times, like the root center of that jump is at 0. Like you're never going up and down. You're just a 2D, sort of collision thing. In the 3rd game, that we're not cheating anymore. We're actually like 3D capsules jumping and colliding and doing things, right? And so that meant we had to come up with a whole new system to make monsters fly. But we're like, well, once you get Mothra, then Megaguirus, obviously, because then you want to, you don't want to build flying tech and only have one person fly. That's dumb.
one of my favorite things in Godzilla Unleashed is if you play single player, you get the camera over the shoulder, and playing as Varan, and you get to fly, and you get to like move and dive and roll as Varan, and it's so cool. I'm like, oh, this is exciting. And like I feel like on the side in the fighting game, there's really no need to like do your whole flying squirrel thing. Like there isn't a lot of advantage, but like from the camera over the back, it's just like hang gliding with Varan, super cool. But yeah, so we did try like getting Jet Jaguar, in the second one. That was a big thing. We put a lot of work into that. We had discussed trying to do Hedorah, but like really, it was like a couple hours, and I was like, well, here's what I'd like to do, and they're like, ooh, that sounds too hard because then we'd have to do this, and I was like, oh, you're right, it's not worth building the tech just to do that one thing because it's not reusable. All that stuff was pretty exciting. Like I was really into Space Godzilla. I was like, oh, we gotta have Space Godzilla. Like Space Godzilla, he's gonna be super rad. I was like, oh, we have to have Destroya. We gotta, all these characters, but they were all obvious, right? So
last question on the roster. I'm sorry, Eric.
Sure.
The original monsters. Your idea? How'd that?
No, that was all Atari. Atari was like, we want to put 2 original characters in. And we were like, okay. And like they made that whole deal with Toho. And it's funny. The fans were always like, well, we don't like that. We'd rather you put 2 other, characters we know in. I don't know. That was all Atari's idea. They so I'll say that they had this idea that like we'd do some concepts, we'd have people vote. But we planned it out, and we were like, we can't make 2 characters that late in the project. So what we did was we decided on one, Crystalak, and we just decided that and started building it right away. and then we did the whole thing where we did the concepts and we put it out, and there was a whole vote online, and we ended up with Obsidius, right? And so then we built Obsidius. He was the last thing we built because by the time, because they have to announce the game before they can announce the competition and for who the characters are, like we have to be pretty far along, right? So Obsidius was the last thing to sort of go in there. And you can't see this, but actually Crystalak was really important to the extended story of Godzilla Unleashed. The story was much more expansive. There were a whole lot of sort of like comic panel sequences. Like I overcomplicate things. I designed this really complicated story where it's like multiple perspectives and like you can see this. I wanted a game where you could lose and still move through the story. There's a lot of games where like, you fight a boss, and if you lose, you just fight the boss again, right? Until you win. And I was like, well, that's not choice. Like that's not interesting. I wanted to have a game where like you can have a game where like you come in and Anguirus is destroying the city, and you can just be like, cool, I'm just gonna hang out over here and not engage. And after 60 seconds, it's like, I guess you're not fighting and the level ends, right? But now your affinity's gone up with Anguirus, with the Earth Defenders, right? Or but while you're in there, like, how much of the city did you destroy? Do you does the Earth see you as a threat or not? And like, so it wasn't just every level defeat every enemy, right? Or sometimes there's 2 enemies and they're fighting, and you could just let them fight, or you can like team up with one against the other, or you can try to defeat both of them, right? And depending on how you did it, like it would change the story. And so every option was valid. I made this huge story, and I was so pleased with it. And it was very complicated, and there's all this affinities and things. And then, for a bunch of terrible reasons, we couldn't build the comic panels. We couldn't build enough comic panels, and we're like, well, we can have about 25 story moments. I'm like, but I have this whole sequence of there's 170 story moments. And like, well, we can do about 25 of them. So we're like, okay. So that's why in Godzilla Unleashed, like you play and there's like a little text box, and like that's the story. It's like, oh, maybe that's the story. And then sometimes you get like a little sequence, but because it's always the same sequence. Hey, Matt Frank just wrote back. He's like, anyway, but there was a whole lot there. And in my original story, Crystalak was a big part of the original thing, right? Because the aliens are seeding the planet with these crystals and growing the crystals, which are corrupting everything. But then because the various kaiju are interacting with and absorbing the crystals for their own power, some of that kaiju-ness gets back into the crystals. And so you get a crystal kaiju who was like grown from the crystals, and that's what Crystalak was about, and that's why he had his attack was the exploding heart, where like his crystal heart. Anyway, there was a whole thing. It all got cut from the story. But anyway, Crystalak, there you go. We had a whole plan for him.
That's super great. So, to us, as younger kids playing this and stuff like that, to us, we thought these games were tremendous. They were phenomenal. Like, we were blown away with all of these games. Per the company, Pipeworks, Atari, were these games successful per their, their guidelines and stuff like that?
Oh,
did they
absolutely.
sell well?
Unfortunately, Atari was going through a lot of troubles at this time. In fact, Godzilla, I believe, was actually the very first game under the new Atari. So there had been a company called Infogrames, right, with the little armadillo loops logo, Infogrames. And they had bought the name Atari, and they had rebranded the whole company as Atari, right? But it was sort of the old Infogrames. And so when we made the contract with the Infogrames, and then they're like, we've bought Atari, and you are going to be the very first game that's part of the new rebranded Atari. All our games are now Atari games. So we're like, ooh, okay. So like that little intro thing where it's like something is like, oh, like little Qbert things, and that's like Atari. And this is the beginning of the Destroy All Monsters. I think we were the very first game to get the new Atari. So we were very important. But the reason they'd done that rebrand was, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more details I don't know, but like they were not financially in a great place, right? And we were very successful for them, and we totally greenlit a second game. They also, that was around the time that they did the Matrix tie-in game, right? Enter the Matrix, right?
Yeah.
Which was a hugely successful pre-order game. The actual game was not that great. But like the number of pre-orders, it hit all kinds of records, like 3 million pre-orders, right? But also, the industry changes. Like there are no pre-orders for games at GameStop anymore. I don't know, maybe there's a few, right? But like when you tie yourself to a certain metric, and so that had been, they're like, oh, we need to get the pre-orders for Godzilla Save the Earth up. That's our new thing, the highest pre-orders ever. That's Atari's bread and butter. It's like, I think the Matrix movies are just very good, right? That's I don't know if it's your game, right? Those are pre-orders. Those are people who hadn't played the game. Anyway, all the point is that Atari struggled and floundered. So even though, yes, we were very successful for them, that didn't save the company overall. Atari was really, they floundered a lot, and it was a struggle. So
that's a shame.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to jump back just a second. You talked about when you guys were first designing the game, how you just kind of wanted to do the 1v1 type of thing.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you tried the 4 person mechanic, and then it was like, oh my god, that's amazing.
Yep.
Did you guys try or storyboard or whatever it's called other styles like for the game, or was it pretty much just go from those two?
Excuse me, I have to remove this cat.
Well,
you can't see, he just jumped down. Okay, yes. Sorry, did we try other things other than just side-on fighting?
Yeah, like you said, you originally were like, okay, this is going to be like an old school fighting game where it's 1 versus 1, and then you eventually did the 4 person mechanic, and it was widely successful, looked awesome. But did you guys have ideas for other styles, or was it,
No, we were convinced it was just going to be a left-right side-on-side fighter. Like Soul Calibur was really our thing, because like Soul Calibur and the second one hadn't come out, but like it's a 3D environment, right? You can sidestep to kind of go around like this, but the camera always keeps you exactly on the left and right. So even though it's a 3D environment, it's functionally a 2D game, right? Like the way that the inputs were.
So would it have been kind of similar than how the Super Godzilla game for Super Nintendo, when the monsters would fight, just kind of like that? Is that what you're referring?
Yes.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Those are very much the style we were going for, which I mean has a lot of impact. Like the way you have to aim your breath weapon is super different if it's a 2D sort of thing versus a 3D sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
And how is jumping and flying, and how does picking up buildings and throwing them work, and another point of reference for us was, what was the game? It was an arcade game where it was kind of like a top down, and there were 4 monsters, and it was a very like sort of like a wrestling style.
Rampage.
No.
King of the Monsters.
King of the Monsters, yeah, King of the Monsters. So that was another sort of touch point. Like, oh, King of the Monsters, like the camera's always kind of here, and it's a little bit top down. But now it's 2D in a different way, right? So it's 2D, like I'm sweeping my things around, but I wouldn't aim up or down. This cat is fascinating. I'm sorry, I am allergic to cats, so I try to keep the cat not in my face. So there were some ideas like, oh, we can do side to side, and then once we switched to 4-player, we're like, oh, well, is it still 2D, but now I'm kind of top down 2D, or kind of at a canted angle? But eventually, I mean, it was like the first thing we tried, and it just worked so well. Is like with 2 players, it keeps this thing, and when the monsters get far enough apart, it switches to what we call a fixed azimuth cam. So the camera's always pointed the same direction within the city when it pans back, right? Which lets us design the cities around, like, oh, well, with the landmarks, you don't let the landmarks hit this way, so you can't ever block both of the monsters. And like, how tall are the buildings? How high should the camera go? How much of the city you build? And so the fixed azimuth cam, an advantage of that was that the way we pulled back, we could keep more of the city in view, and you'd spend less time looking out into the sort of infinite horizon. Because that was the thing they worried about a lot. I was always like, who cares what's in the far distance? And like, no, we gotta work on like a different like diffusive fog system and like all the popular. I was like, I don't know, I don't think everybody cares. Some people really care, so I mean that's great. It's great that people care about different things. I focus on the area I focus on, they focus on those areas, so that's good.
Before we move on, I just kind of want to go with the look of the game. Did you have any other choices with the actual look? Like the look that it was like if you want to do like cell shading or more cartoony, or the actual like look of the monsters and like the cities and stuff like that, the artistic, I guess, look of it.
I don't think I can pull this up. So one of our artists did a cell shaded render of our 3D models. I have that somewhere. I think it's on.
That would be so cool.
Yeah, I think it's on this drive. Yeah, it's very cool. They never seriously considered that. Like ours was like, this would be cool because like Zelda Wind Waker came out in between 2 and 3, so that was a big deal. I mean, so there's a lot. I am not the right person to ask about the graphic stuff, like the bump maps, specular maps. Like so one of the big things I know on the in Destroy All Monsters mainly, that was a GameCube specific thing, is that there would be a helicopter that had a spotlight, and there'd be like a spotlight that would play across the monsters as they were fighting. I don't really get it. Something about that was an incredible technical achievement on our end. We were like, oh, we got this spotlight that's highlighting it, and I'm like, yeah, that looks cool. Yeah, we have. So I'll say like the game Pipeworks was very engineer heavy. It's still very engineer heavy. Like it's a company mostly founded by and run by engineers, right? So like that's really the focus, like the engineering. Like making the game really robust and run really well and be very like that is a lot of the focus of the game, right? And the visuals, they're not the most important thing, right? But some extras like getting in specular highlights or what I do not. This is not my area. Other people could talk about this a lot better. But getting that stuff in from a technical standpoint was very important. But then like making the game look as good as possible was. There was always some people who really cared about that, but like, they were not there. And like, definitely I was all about like, I want asymmetrical fighting. I want all the monsters to have a very unique identity. I also had a lot of opinions about like what makes a fighting game good. Like I've talked about Street Fighter several times. I really like those Capcom fighters, but I also hate them. Like, because if you play those games against somebody who's fairly good or better than you, you don't even get to play the game.
Yep.
Right? And that's terrible. Like, I was like, none of that. So, like, in the Godzilla games, you get together, there are no long strings. There's no combos. There's no chains, because I want you to come together, go, bam, 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 and then you get knocked apart. And you come together, and you get knocked apart. And that's so that, because that clash is fun. I just want to do that clash over and over. Like, my goal with all of the games was that a pretty amateur player should be able to knock out 60% of my health before I beat them. Right?
Okay.
So a new player is not going to beat me at the game, right? But they are not going to. I'm not going to, 100-0 combo them at all.
Yeah.
They're going to get to do a bunch. They're going to get to execute a bunch of rage attacks. They're going to get to run around and do some sweet, like they're going to get a bunch of good hits in, and like they're going to hit me for 30 damage. I'm going to hit them for 40, so I'm going to win. But but that feels a lot better than they don't get anything in. That was a really important thing for me in all the games. That's what I was focused on. I was really in and Geras takes 10% more damage from edge attacks, but oh no, Super Godzilla doesn't have enough edge attacks to be competitive in that matchup. Well, okay, so we'll change the damage type, and Geras is that's where I'm at all day, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of thing I got really excited about. Yes.
Gotcha.
Sorry, you asked about the graphics. I wish.
No, that's completely fine. I was just kind of curious, but just to know that somebody kind of did like a cell shading kind of blueprint of it is kind of intriguing, honestly.
So here's actually an interesting thing. So Mark Crow, for the third game, he had this idea. He was really excited about having the cities be destroyed. He's like, oh, instead of it's just these pristine cities, they're going to be, Seattle's going to be under lava, right? London's going to be lifted up in the air like a floating island. Sydney's going to be completely underwater. Tokyo's going to, all this is going to be a radioactive cloud around Osaka. Like, oh yeah, so this is going to be so cool. And we worked so hard on that. And years later, everyone's just like, I didn't like that. I want to destroy the city. And I was like, yeah, I can kind of see this. But that never occurred to us. From the day one, they're like, no, that we're gonna make these cities all really different and interesting. But people are like, that's not different. It's just destroy. I wanted to destroy the city. Right? Oh, okay, that's a good point. Yeah,
that's so funny.
Yeah.
Funny. Oh my goodness. So with the first two games, they were very similar to each other. Controller based. Everything. Do the moves and stuff like that. Then when Godzilla Unleashed came out, and especially when you guys brought it to the Wii, it was almost a completely different game, or it was a completely different game because the controls were completely different. It wasn't your typical controller and everything. You had to do movement and stuff like that. How much of a how difficult was that to really kind of remake the game, even though you kind of already had it for coming out for PlayStation 2, and you had to make a whole new one. Plus, you put more kaiju in the Wii version than the PS2.
Okay, so let me explain why the first two games were so similar. Because that was not our intent. That was not our intent at all. The second game, I mentioned Atari had just done the Enter the Matrix game, and that game's got shooting and driving and hand-to-hand combat. So all these things, they're put that in your Godzilla game. You got to have Godzilla swimming under the water, and Rodan flying through the air, and monsters fighting each other and chasing all these different things. That were like, oh, so what? Okay. And so Pipeworks spent 18 months trying to build that stuff. So in Godzilla Cellular, there are these two little rail shooter games, right? Mm-hmm. We spent 18 months building those.
Wow.
Right? For contrast, that first Godzilla game we built start to finish in about 10 months. Okay.
Wow.
So we spent 18 months making those two rail shooters, as well as this whole adventure mode thing where you're traveling from island to island. There's this whole, it was never very good. It didn't work. And they're like, keep the controls the same. And I'm like, the controls can't be the same if it's over the shoulder. You're Godzilla. I mean, what are you talking about? And you're not fighting monsters. We struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled with that. We spent 18 months trying to do that. And at one point they were like, oh my God, this game isn't going to come together. And we were like, let's just remake the first game again, but with more monsters. Go do it in 4 months.
Wow.
And so, I mean, we had built a lot of assets from that thing, and we were like, okay, let's just throw everything away. Let's just like the last time, everybody. You remember how we did that? Here we go. And we knocked the whole thing out. It was an extremely compressed time frame. Yes. So now I think that's probably the best one, right? But we were really, because we did that first game was such a big hit, right? Mm-hmm. And it was really good. It was loved, but there were a bunch of things with it that were not great. There were little combo things. There were certain things that were exploitable. And so we wanted to fix those things. So the second one, when we actually got down and built the actual game, we just kind of knocked it out in short order. We were like, just like the first one, there's no time to like discuss things. Everybody go crank right now. And so we just did that. And so that's why those first two were very similar. So the third one, we were like, okay, we're going to redo it all the way we've been wanting to, but we're going to leave it the same essential game, right? We're just going to do a much more complicated story. And one of the things I really wanted to do was I really wanted to have, because the game has to be matched for one-on-one, right?
Yeah.
Like any one monster should be able to fight the other and it should be reasonable, right? But I really wanted to have fights where you fight two monsters, right? I want 1-on-2. I want 1-on-3, right?
Yeah.
I want 2-on-2. Like, how do I balance that? And so that's where the whole like the power surge system came from. It's like, oh, what can I do? If I give you 3 power surges, is it now fair for you to fight 2 other kaiju, right? So we came up with all that. So I want to do that. I wanted to enable those things and have all those custom modes where you can modify the damage outputs and the health regen. I want to do all that stuff. But you asked about the most important thing. So we were all about the Wii. So we had published Rampage. Rampage Total Destruction was a launch title on the Wii, right? So I've got an alpha kit for like the Wii controls, right? Like I was heavily involved in helping develop those and test those in Nintendo on early games. So we were experts on all those Wii controls, right? And the Wii, I don't know if you remember, it blew up. Like the Wii was the biggest.
Yes.
That whole generation is so weird because we were like, oh, was Microsoft or Nintendo, or was Microsoft or Sony the better thing? I'm like, the Wii is outselling both of them combined every month. And they're like, yeah, but that doesn't count, which is super interesting because in the previous generation, the GameCube and the Xbox were the two, powerful things. And the PS2 was not at their level in terms of like processing, but it was outselling them by a ton. And so everyone knows that the PS2 was winning. And then the next generation, Sony's like, oh yeah, we're only counting of the 2 that are of the most graphically powerful. That's the way we do it. I was like, what? It's like you're very much changing the rules here, Sony. And that was also, man, the PS3 definitely Sony's weakest. Like if you were saying like how they're doing, like PS2 is the high point, PS3 is definitely their low point, right? And, anyway, but the Wii, it was selling incredibly well. And because we were Wii developers, I was able to get one a little early, so I was able to get it for that first like Thanksgiving. So I brought it over to the big Thanksgiving party, and I was like, "What is this? It's so good!" Anyway, the Wii was huge, so we were like, "Yeah, we're all in on the Wii." And so we had this decision, and I remember this very clearly. They're like, "This game, we're redoing all this stuff." They're like, "I want a game that could not be played with a traditional controller." That was like the early mandate, from us internally, but also from Atari. We're like, yeah, it's a really lean into the motion controls, really do all the unique stuff on the Wii, make a game that could not work on a traditional controller, right?
Yeah.
So I had a specific goal to make a game that you could not play with a traditional controller, right? As that game started to have troubles, we really should have revisited that and really should have moved away from that initial assumption. And in hindsight, I'm like, oh yeah, we should have, but like that was it. Like, and we had a bunch of troubles, and like, man, I could have eased some of those troubles if I had said, oh, I'm going to use a more traditional control scheme now, and like I could have easily done a lot to do that. And maybe, I mean, it's hard because I was not the top people. I was not at that top level decision maker level, right? There were definitely 4 or 5 people at Pipeworks who were at that level, and I was not there. But also, I was making a whole lot of decisions in the game. Like I was driving, and my friend Solomon, like we were in there every day. I was working, through the night twice a week. Like we were very, very influential. I mean, we made a lot more decisions than those top level decision makers, right?
Yeah.
So I really feel like I should have seen that and been like, we're having troubles in our production stuff. We should, like we did in the last time, we should be like, hey, let's make it more like the last game so that we know what we're doing better. And I did not see that, but also nobody else saw that, right?
Yeah.
That was kind of thing. I mean, like we changed owners in there, we moved buildings, there was a lot of changes, and Godzilla Unleashed, like 75 or 80% of it is the best Godzilla game we ever made. But like, if I make the best cake I've ever made and then I burn it, you don't say, wow, this is a really good cake that is burned and that's why I can't eat it. You're like, this cake is no good.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so it hurts me because we made that game. So many of the pieces in that game are really good, like much better than the others. And the whole is not very good. And that's a shame.
So I agree. Excuse me. I agree with everything everybody in the chat saying, and Eric, and loved the games. Just huge part of our childhoods, like we said. Was there plans for a fourth or a sequel beyond the trilogy? And if there was, can you tell us maybe what the story or?
I mean, we talked about it. We made a pitch for it. But Atari went under after that. And it was not clear how we'd do the rights, how we'd have to start building those relationships with Toho again. Also, Pipeworks changed a lot. Like Pipeworks went through new management. We started getting different focus. There were a lot of things. So Pipeworks did make a mobile game, Smash 3, Godzilla Smash 3, right?
Yeah, okay.
Not really the same at all. And I'm actually not sure that anybody who worked on the Godzilla games worked on the Smash 3 game. But but that was sort of it. That was our last little bit, and we went in a different direction. And Pipeworks largely does co-development now, which means, like for example, I think we're done now, but I think for like 4 or 5 years, like we were making Madden football, right? So there was there's the main EA studio that was working on Madden football, but then like Pipeworks had a whole bunch of like subsystems that we were responsible for that we were developing with them, right? And there's a bunch of other studios, a bunch of the developers were like, oh, the main team is here, and then Pipeworks is like the augmentation team that helps make this other thing. And so making games like Godzilla, where it's like it's a Pipeworks game, Pipeworks is the primary person developing these. We have not been doing a lot of that in the last 10 years or more. And like the industry is changing a lot, and I don't know if you're aware, but there have been massive layoffs in a whole bunch of companies the last year or two, especially in the tech sector, especially in the game developers. And Pipeworks keeps doing very well, and so when things seem tenuous, that's not when people want to change and do something. It's like maybe we should do something more risky. Maybe it's a hard sell. I sure would like to do that, of course, but. Yeah, there we go.
You mentioned earlier. Sorry, Eric, I'm skipping ahead here for a sec. You mentioned earlier that there were certain things that you had seen that you're like, oh man, I wish maybe we had a redo, or I wish we could have done that a little bit differently. Can you tell us what those were that from now you're obviously in the weeds because you're sitting day in and day out. And I believe you even said, I probably didn't notice it, and probably 98% of the people that played it were like, didn't notice it. But to you, what did you see?
Okay, so the way we build the control tree is you have different animations, and then the animations transition from one animation into another when certain criteria are met, right? We call it like a command edge, right? And so you're playing the animation, and if this happens, like you press A, then it stops playing the animation and does it here. And we can set a bunch of rules like, well, if you press A during the first, 22 frames, nothing happens. But if you press A after that, then this happens. Or if you're holding down A, then right at 22 frames, you start the transition. Or maybe it doesn't unless you start pressing. Or maybe if you it can get really complicated, and I made it very complicated. So one of the important rules was how long the different reactions last, right? So we have, in the first game, there are light, stagger, knockdown, and super knockdown reactions, right? And they all have their own different animations. And you're like, oh, a light reaction is going to last 9 frames, right? Yeah. That's important. Like that's the key. And it's like, okay, so when I go jab, jab, I make my jab 6 frames and 6 frames. That means if I hit you with the first jab, I will definitely hit you with the second jab.
Yeah.
Right. And like, you work out these times like, well, how long is that reaction? How long is this reaction? And Yes. And so there's also a set of reactions if you're ducking in the game. You can duck,
Mhm.
and if you get hit, you have a little like oof, oof while
Mhm.
you're ducking. Okay. But also you can duck to cancel certain things. Okay. So like if I'm doing an uppercut and then I'm like, oh wait, I don't want to do the uppercut. And if you duck early enough, you will cancel the uppercut into the duck. Okay.
Okay.
Great. This all
Yeah.
makes sense. I don't see a
Mhm.
problem. Well, there are a couple of cases where I built this all by hand, right? And it
Yeah.
was, there are a couple of cases where you can do an attack and cancel the attack so early that you can do the attack again before the reaction has a chance to finish,
Oh wow.
which means you have an infinite combo, right? And I just said there were no combos and you
Yeah.
cannot do a thing. And I was like, oh yeah, but if I can attack you every 7 frames, you got nothing. There's nothing you can do, right? And there were a couple of places in the game where, so I will tell you now, I will expose it. It's terrible. We fixed this for the Japanese version, but in the original version of Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee, if you play as Godzilla 90s and you hold and you attack with a tail whip, just a regular tap tail whip,
Okay.
and then you hold down duck and just hit tail whip as fast as you can, you will crush everything. No trouble. You want to win that game? Yeah, you just go tail whip, tail whip, tail whip, tail whip, tail whip, because the tail whip gets canceled into the duck, and from the duck you can execute a tail whip early enough that they can't finish their thing. So it's just as easy as, so you have to tail whip without ducking, and then hold down the duck during the tail whip animation, and then just hit tail whip as fast as you can, and the whole game breaks. Yeah. Yeah.
Holy
Yep. See, now I've explained it, and now everyone will know it, and like very few people found it, and like, but like that's the thing, like that's all my fault. That was a me thing, right? I'm the one doing those timings, and I was like, oh, I probably changed something, or we changed the cycle length on the duck animation, and I set it up as a percentage instead of a flat number of frames, something.
Mhm.
But I screwed that up, and I fixed it for the Japanese release, but like,
Gotcha.
and it's also fixed. So actually, there's an Xbox release. The
Yep.
Xbox release in America of Destroy All Monsters Melee, that's the one where we put in Kiru.
Yep.
And that one, that's the definitive edition of Destroy All Monsters
Gotcha.
Melee. Like that is
Gotcha.
because we were Xbox game developers. Like
Mhm.
so Pipeworks also made all the boot screens. Like when you turn on an Xbox, it goes like whoop, 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 Xbox. That's us.
Mhm.
We built that, right?
Oh, cool.
In fact, my friend Solomon, he specifically basically did those mostly on his own, right?
Wow.
And so like we were early, we made all those Xbox demos. We really wanted to work on that Xbox, and so like the Xbox version of Destroy All Monsters Melee was our jam. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's see, the other classic example. I say classic, whatever. Is that in Godzilla Unleashed? So Destroy had the horn katana. Another thing that I invented, the horn katana. That's not a thing. I just made that up. I was just like, oh, maybe he's got a lightsaber that comes out of his horn. He can swing his head around. That sounds awesome. And now that's just how he works now. Anyway, so he had horn katana moves in all the games. In Godzilla Unleashed, I was like, oh, okay, we're doing everything more procedurally. So he's got a more continuous energy bar. So instead of like just spending discrete chunks, he's got a continuous thing. And so like, okay, well, he can swing his horn katana and just takes energy, but he can swing even without the energy. He just gets this little tiny stumpy, no good horn katana.
Yeah.
Right? It's just wimpy. Well, remember I said I really want to make a game where you could do 1-on-2 fights.
Yes.
So there's a whole system that almost nobody ever saw where like if I hit you and somebody else hits you at almost the same time, you would just go flying, right? So you could really double team people. Like it was very cool, right? So again, I screwed up. So with Destroya, when he swings his horn katana and you do not have enough energy, you get both the regular horn katana and the stumpy one, which means he hits you twice with 2 different attacks on the same frame, which means it triggers the you just got double teamed code and you just get clobbered. And
wow.
But that's what happens when you have no energy. And so if you have no energy with him, you can be like wonk, 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 because you can do it forever when you have no energy, but it absolutely clobbers everybody. So people don't understand exactly what they're like. Oh, the horn katana is too good. I was like, no, actually the horn katana is fine. It's the thing that's supposed to happen instead of the horn katana when you're out of energy. That's broken. And so,
Gotcha.
unfortunately, when we're testing the game, we all know how to play the game. So we're only using the horn katana when you have energy. And it was a well-balanced thing that it cost this much energy. I mean, it was good. But like, we would not swing when we didn't have enough energy because we knew that you got the little weak one that was no good, except that I made a mistake. And the little weak one, actually, because of this double hit code, completely clobbers you.
Yeah.
Sigh.
That's so
Sigh.
good.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Also, I renamed one of Megagearus's attacks. I don't remember what it was, but it had this name, and I was like, oh, that's a bad name. I'll change it to be this, right? But when we wrote the tutorial was like, up in A, this is the name, right? And so on the screen it would say, this is the name, hook claw, double uppercut, whatever. And the way the code worked is that it would wait for you to play an animation with that name to say, good job, you did it. So when I changed the name, we didn't update the tutorial. So you cannot complete Megagearus's tutorial because I changed the name of the animation in the code. And so you cannot get, I mean, there weren't achievements on the Wii, but essentially you can't complete Megagearus's tutorial.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh.
Now we know.
Now you know. Nobody cares. That's not the thing that made that game no good. It hurts. It hurts. No. I was at a Godzilla G-Fest, and I did a panel. We were to talk about things, Q&A with Simon Strange, whatever. And there was somebody who stood up who was like, "Would you like to publicly apologize for Godzilla Unleashed?" And I was just like, I mean, that's a little harsh. I see what you mean.
Such good intention.
That's rough. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
So what could you name some of the things or what your biggest obstacle it was for actually developing these games? Like, what was the one thing that you always remember, like, oh man, like this just has kicked our butt, for doing?
I mean, man, getting a building instruction system was just really challenging, right? Because we had a lot of interesting ideas, but a lot of them were hard. And then when you make a building instruction system, you have to build all the art to work with that instruction system, and then you get to find out if it's any good, right? And we did this a couple times. We build things and we try. We're like, that's not good. Well, we have to come up with a new plan quickly because we have to rebuild all the buildings for whatever the new plan is. And that's just the reality. There are certain things where oh, this system, there are a lot of things tweaking the damage numbers and the speeds of the different attacks. I can do that all day to just really tune it in, right? But some of those systems that interact with a lot of different parts, especially the ones that interact with a lot of other things you have to make, they're so, it's like turning a super tanker, right? You gotta call it so far in advance, and and really with Godzilla Unleashed, we did 3 full iterations on the damage system, and parts of it were good, but you're burning hundreds of thousands of dollars every time you do that, and at some point you're let's try something that's less good, but that we're more sure will be okay. And that's just where we had to end up, right? So
So we're hour and 10 minutes here. We don't want to be rude and keep you too much longer. We appreciate your time. Do you have time for 2 more questions?
Oh,
maybe?
Absolutely. I've Thursday night is my online games night. So the regular crew, actually of other Pipeworks people. But that doesn't start till 8:30, so I'm fine.
Okay, perfect. We got time for 2 more then. So
great.
I'm gonna ask you, and then honestly, if you're willing, I'm gonna say this now. We would love to have you back because I honestly think we could probably go another hour or so easily. So if sometime in the future, maybe we can have you back and do a deeper dive on, because there's honestly so much that you've done beyond these games that we haven't even touched. So
it's true. These games represent 4 years of my career, and I've been doing this since 1998. So So, so my last question will be, and this might be hard, it might be easy, I don't know. Out of the 3 Godzilla games, which one is your favorite? And Second one, Save the Earth. Yeah, no question.
Okay, all right, that was easy. Okay,
easy.
Favorite character though?
I mean, I have to go with Gigan. We actually we did a thing in the first game. There were 12 of us, right? The main staff of Pipeworks, it was 12 of us. And so I came up with this idea. I assigned one character to every developer, right? It's like, Ron, you're King Ghidorah. Your job is to master King Ghidorah, play him all the time and advocate for him and try to, make him stronger. And like everyone got their own character that they were responsible for playing. And we're like, oh, who's winning? Oh, we can't do that, like whatever. And man, and I just called Gigan. I just took Gigan. I mean, and there's so much complexity and subtlety to Gigan. Like I don't even know if people know, but like you press both triggers to teleport, right?
Mhm.
Like that's the thing. You sit there, you press both buttons, he will jump up in the air and teleport and go away. But there's a lot more because you can jump and then you can initiate your teleport. So you can change the timing of your teleport. And when you're teleporting, depending on which of the two triggers you release, he does different kinds of teleports, right? So you can change like the direction and the distance that you're teleporting, depending on like if you release them together or you release left and then right, or when you push them, you can push it. Like there's a whole lot of complexity. So there was a competition, like a contest where people are playing Save the Earth and everyone's fighting against each other and they're all playing very, very well. Like they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. They're finding little exploits that I don't know. And then when they finished, they were like, and now the winner gets to play Simon Strange, right? And I'm just like, can I play Gigan? I'm like, yes. And like, I'm like, oh no, oh, you don't know that I can just do anything I want with Gigan. I just watch him like, oh, you want to do that? Great. Well, I just do this with Gigan, and he gets behind you, and you can't do anything about it. And you're like, wait, what's happening? He was like, oh no, Gigan have a lot of extra tricks that nobody knows. Yep, he does. So yes, so I'm not the best in the world at that game. I'm awfully good, but like I can definitely play some Gigan. So there you go. Gigan is the guy.
I love it.
So that is so funny. All right, last question here. It's kind of like a two-parter here. So with the influx of the popularity of like the kaiju genre as of now, with like the MonsterVerse, been coming out. Other kaiju movies have been coming out. Toys. I mean, merchandise. Everything is kind of coming out, and we have this very big like kaiju boom, if you so call.
Sure.
As a designer, do you feel like there should be more like kaiju games out there? And with the ones that are out there, what is your opinion on them? Like, are they good? Could they be better? Like, like Gigabash and Dawn of the Monsters and the Godzilla game for PS4, like just to name a few. What do you think?
I really like Gigabash. I think Gigabash is really cool. I play Gigabash quite a bit.
Cool.
Yeah, I really like Gigabash. I think it's a great example. It's got a good system. Is it Dawn of the Monsters? Is that the other one that had the Godzilla expansion? I'm sorry, the names all swim together.
No, that's the side. That was a side-scrolling one with their own monsters.
Okay.
Brand new.
So was Gigabash the one that had the Godzilla DLC?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yes. So that. So I'm wrong. Undo everything I just said. I really like Dawn of the Monsters. That's the one that I play.
Gotcha.
I'm so sorry. All the names swim in my head.
Yeah.
So Dawn of the Monsters, the side-scrolling things with all the upgrades, I really like that. Gigabash doesn't really live up to its potential, in my opinion. It is okay. I don't think it's setting the world on fire. Now, I really love that they had original stuff and then they licensed a pack with Godzilla monsters in. Yeah. That's what I was going to do with Kaiju Combat. I was like, this is how you do a thing. I was like, I'll do an Ultraman pack and a Godzilla pack and a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man pack and like get all the different things together.
Yeah.
Right? But Gigabash is I don't know. It seems simple to me, and simple is okay. Like a simple game, simple is one way a game can be good, right? But I want something that has a little more meat to it. And I want, of course, I mean, there's also like Skullgirls is a great example of like a good fighting game, but it's really complicated. There's no casual Skullgirls players, right? It's only for the hardcores.
Yeah.
And that's another way you can be good, but it also drives off other people. Like it doesn't do anything. Anyway, Giga Bash for me, like it's fine. And like I think like the monsters look good and they're animated well. And I think the destruction stuff all looks good, but like I don't really feel like I have enough choices. You know, I'm like, oh, here's the thing that I can do that's good. I'm like, ooh, how many hours do I want to do this thing? Maybe not that many, which is fine. I mean, it's like making stuff is hard, and making video games is hard, right? So actually putting a game out is great. Like, good on you for actually putting out a video game. But it's like, you know, when I go to a movie and the movie is not very good, that's okay. But when like the main premise of the movie is no good, I'm like, come on, movie. Like, really, like you must have, did nobody point this out? And like with Giga Bash, I'm like, oh, but they're like the way it is, the thing that makes it good kind of really limits it. Like it can't be big and deep and complex. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I bought it. I bought the Godzilla DLC. I'll buy more. But like, I'm going to play it occasionally some. I'm like, yeah, that's that one. I sure would like to see more. Another great example, like the Godzilla game. I don't know what we call it, but just the Godzilla that was on the PS. PS4, right?
Yep, PS4.
Was it just called Godzilla? I don't remember.
Yep. Like, that was the Godzilla game or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Like that's like in some ways the best Godzilla game you could make, and it's not very fun. Right? It's like it's super movie accurate. It's like they nail the details. You're like, this is exactly it. That's not very much fun. Right? So there you go.
I love that answer.
I love it. Coming at the end with a hot take, riling up the fan base. I love it. Hey, we're the monsters. We're the monsters with attitude. You got to have a little sizzle, little attitude. Simon, thank you. You've been so generous with your time. We've gone well over an hour, and you've been so patient. I appreciate that. Last word is yours, my friend. Tell us anything you want, any plugs you possibly have, social medias you want to plug, games, anything.
So this is old news. We didn't get to Kaiju Combat.
Yeah, we didn't.
No, that's okay. That's fine. It saves me a lot of hassle. But you know, I did this Kaiju Combat thing that for me was going to be the spiritual successor to Godzilla. I was like, I licensed the engine from Pipeworks, and I'm going to use all the same tools, and that's a whole story. But we have I have a demo that's out on Steam that I really liked. But one of the things we did is that community got really into making original monsters, right? I mean, really, really into making so many original monsters. And we did this thing. I have my little binder here. And so we made all these cards, right? These trading cards. I'm going to show them here. Yes, we've got like 600 of these like different trading cards of these characters with all their stats and their backstory and upgraded evolve forms. And these are all original creations. I didn't make these. These are other people's stuff. But we made and sold all these trading cards, right? And
that's cool.
That's fine. I printed a bunch of them, and they're sitting in the warehouse. The warehouse is a room in my house, and I've got stuff. And for some reason, like 6 months ago, some people were like, "Hey, I'm an adult now. Do you still have those cards? Like, there's some of those cards I never bought." And so I've been selling a bunch of these cards again. And so I pulled some out of the warehouse, and I was like, "Well, here's how much stock I have left. I have some of these, and I have whatever." And I would love to sell out the rest of my stock. And so there we go. There's my one plug, is that if anybody wants some cool Kaiju trading cards, you can go to sunstone.co and buy some of my Kaiju trading cards. They're very cheap because I just have a few boxes in the warehouse. I'm like, oh, I should sell off the rest of these someday. I'm sure the cats would appreciate having a little more space to run around. So,
yeah,
or not, whatever,
Very good. And honestly, Simon, we need to have you back because there is so much that we did not get to.
There's a lot. Yeah,
there is a lot. There's a lot for sure. We could easily probably go another hour, 2 hours. So if you're up to it, we'll set another date for in the next month or two or something. And
we didn't talk about Rampage either. I would love to talk about Rampage.
There's a whole lot. Trust me, Rampage talk. There's a lot of stuff in our notes that we have not gotten to. Which is why I'm like, we definitely need to have you back. Simon, thank you again so much for your generosity and your time, and just honestly, all this knowledge. It was fantastic. It was a lot of fun.
Yep.
Eric, anything you want to say before I take us home?
Yeah, just I mean, thank you for making these games. Like I said, and we keep kind of reiterating, like this was a big thing for us back in the day when we were younger and stuff like that. Like we have people in the chat that are part of our group that were actually playing the game even before this stream and everything on our Twitch channel and everything. And actually, one of our members wants to go one-on-one with you, Gigan versus Gigan kind of thing, because he's a huge Gigan fan and everything like that. So Samson wants to go one-on-one with you and see who the better Gigan fighter. But yeah, it's so much fun, and it was just so great to play these games. And it was otherworldly, honestly, when these came out. We're like, oh my god, we have Godzilla on a video game, besides like the Super Nintendo or the Nintendo, it's just an up-to-date, like, cool Godzilla game. And it was mind-blowing. It really, really was. I still remember when I first got the game, played the game, and I had a grin from ear to ear, and I just couldn't stop smiling when I was playing this thing. So thank you for helping make this game and make it a dream.
I want to say, because I don't say this out loud, I think, as often as I should, but like, I had a lot of control over these games. Like, there's a lot of stuff, like all like the monsters, the combos, like, man, I did that, right? That was a thing. Yeah. But also, the people at Pipeworks were super good. Like, Pipeworks was like, they took like the 10 best all-stars for Dynamics. So like, let's make a company with all the best people and do this thing. And like, and so like, it is, I do not want to get the impression that I made these games, right? I had my area, like I was a thing, I was important. Yes. So like, I am 1/12 of the team that was making that first game, and every part of that team was completely knocking it out of the park, right? I mean, like, my friend Solomon like made this tool. So they weren't even going to hire me at one point. They're like, this tool is so good, we'll be able to hire a 10-year-old off the street. He'll come in and just make the best game ever in 20 minutes by mistake, because the tool is so good, right? Like, we had all these things, I had all these AI advancements and all those like all these things. And like, I remember, like, there's a lot of great work there. Like, it's not at all my game. I'm just the monster guy, right? So
yeah. Yeah, just thank you though.
Yes. Thank you again, Simon. And honestly, thank you to our listeners with attitude for your guys' continued support. We had another fun and incredible show where we learned a lot about the trilogy of Godzilla games from Pipeworks and Atari, which was just, honestly, there was a lot of tidbits in there that I don't think anybody knew, whether it was licensing or some other in the weeds stuff that I just found fascinating. And of course, obviously, we want to thank our guest again, Mr. Simon Strange, who will be Dr. Simon Strange, possibly the next time we talk to him, for making.
Fingers crossed. I've already finished my dissertation, and I went and I did the defense. I had to fly back to Scotland and like defend it, and I need some changes. They have to make some tweaks, and I got to just finish those tweaks, and then I'll get the degree. But I'm so close. Close.
Good luck to you, and thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Yeah. And as always, everybody, follow us on all of our socials and embrace the attitude. As always, take care, everybody. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.